Hey, my name is James Britt, and I'm from Mount Olive, North Carolina.
I'm Jay Jones, and I'm with S&J Farms. That's my family farm that we have here. And we're in the Kenansville and the Warsaw districts where we farm at.
So we are Chad and Kim Woods, and we farm in northern Orange County in Hurdle Mills, North Carolina. The name of our farm is Springcrest Farm.
All right, so welcome to 3B Cattle Company. My name is Lauren Langley, and we're out here in Snow Camp, North Carolina.
So I am Brad Ross, and we are here at our farm, Oakhurst Farms, and we are in Richfield, North Carolina today.
My name is Aaron Bradley, and we're here in Ballstick, North Carolina, in Rutherford County. And my wife and I own and operate Colfax Creek Farm.
The reason we got in the cow business is because it accompanies what we do with our row crop operation very well. We're able to use marginal farmland. We're not making very much money tending it, and put cows on it. Land grow grass just fine, and the cows love it. And we're able to take swine effluent, poultry litter, and fertilize these summer pastures and our winter annuals. And for us to be able to plant cover crops with rye, oats, etc., and graze those cattle, rotationally graze them. We can graze a lot of cattle through the winter over a few acres and not have to feed as much hay, and that really helps us on cutting down on the labor costs.
The reason that we have cows today is because we built hog houses in 1991. And we had to have a source of getting the grass up. And at that time, we didn't have $50,000 or $60,000 to go buy hay baling equipment, so we bought the four-legged hay baling equipment. And we started out with 10, and then we went to 20, and then we went to 30, and we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 120, 25 cows right now.
So we have beef cattle on this farm because there's always been cows of some sort here. It's actually been in my family for over 100 years. I can trace it back to about the 1870s. And then, so it's always been in agriculture. It used to be a dairy farm. We got out of the dairy business in the late 90s, and it just seemed like there needed to be cows here. This is the farm I grew up on, so I just felt like my ancestors were thinking that cows needed to be back on here. And we weren't going to go in the dairy business. We weren't going to go back down that road. So beef cattle seemed like a good fit.
Well, one of the reasons too is we've got some areas here on the farm that just aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not feasible to row crop or even harvest hay off of. They're just.
Yep.
Either just the terrain is too steep or something like that. So I mean, the cows are a good fit in some of those areas too.
So we are a cow-calf operation. Our primary business is actually commercial broiler chickens. So the cows are supplemental. Well, it's what we enjoy. We like having them out on the land here. And we do have purebred Hereford cattle, purebred Black Angus cattle, and we do some crossbreeding as well.
We produce and sell 100% grass-fed beef. We sell pastured pork, pastured broilers. We sell eggs from laying hens that we rotate around our pasture. And kind of the idea or the philosophies that we have is to raise animals in an environment that's very healthy for them. And we feel like as we do that, it's something that we're really feeding our soils and building more life, more microbes in the soil, and trying to look at that 10-year plan. And 10 years from now, we want to have soils and forages that are more drought resistant, that have a higher nutritive value, and are just better off than saying if we were to put in other inputs into it that we may see results from sooner that may not build up that overall health or that holistic health of the soils.
Rotational grazing has worked really well for us. Like this pasture we're in now has 50 head of mama cows. It's a 33-acre pasture. We've got split 3 ways, and it's took them through the whole summer. We had a really tough June and July. The grass has really held us on, and being able to graze this in 3 different paddocks, you're not having grass get trampled, giving it time to regrow. We've even got a couple hay cuttings off of it. So being able to rotationally graze definitely helps you hold more animals on more acres, on less acres.
4 or 5 years ago, we were going through a really harsh winter, and we were getting low on feed and getting low on hay, and we seemed to have a good little bit of grass going, but we knew that if we just turned them loose on it, we were going to lose that also. And so that's probably the first step we had toward rotational grazing. And we got that set up, and lo and behold, we got them through the whole winter on as little as nothing as you could get. And I said, we might need to look at do something a little better than, the next year. And so we've added to it over the past 4 or 5 years, and I think over the past 2 years, we've gotten pretty good at it. We've started putting in alleyways and different paddocks, and depending on the size and shape of the field. And we just come through a summer with a drought, and we didn't sell any calves last spring because of the price and so forth. And we brought them all through on the same amount of millet that we would generally carry them through when they would just let them have at it. And our goal is we want our paddocks. This is what we've come to the conclusion this year. We want our paddocks to every 2 days we want to rotate. And if we found out if we did it on the size paddocks we make, if we do it on 3 days, it takes the crop too long to come back. And so a 2-day rotation is what we do on all the pastures that we have. And it's been working out pretty good for us this year.
And I can remember back in the late 80s and early 90s when my dad and uncle who ran the dairy farm here were actually rotationally grazing the dairy cows on some of the same pastures that we're rotationally grazing our beef cattle now. So we've been doing that kind of forage management for a pretty good while around here.
I think it really lets us utilize the acres that we have. So we don't run a tremendous amount of acreage here per head of cattle. So we're able to take that grass and let it rest for a certain amount of time, depending on the weather, and can get back to it 20, 30, 40 days later. To where if we were continually grazing it, it seems like that they just keep the forage eaten down, just to the ground all the time. It also gives the soil some cover, so you don't have to worry about the erosion aspect of it and that kind of stuff. So it seems to make just the soil health better. The cows do better on it. It keeps the cows a lot more tame when we're doing the rotational grazing. So it's a lot of different benefits that come from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I learned about temporary fencing and rotational grazing in college. So I graduated from NC State University in 2010 and had a concentration in animal science and took some beef cattle classes there and brought all that information back to the farm and said, Dad, I have some crazy ideas. Let's try this. And so we started stringing up temporary fence everywhere. And that's kind of how we got going because we had larger section pastures. Like this one we're standing in is about 8 acres. And so we have busted it down into about 2.5 acre spots or so. And so that's been able to help us to have more rotations to go through so that we're able to achieve the most out of our pastures.
Yeah, I think one of the big things on implementing the rotational grazing and what it does for the forages is the biggest thing I've noticed is how quick our forages, our grasses will jump back out if we do not overgraze them. If you overgraze them and take it on down and scalp them to the ground, obviously that's deteriorating some of the root system underneath. It's taking that plant, that forage longer to recover, and you're kind of in limbo on that pasture. It's sort of out of commission. It's out of use for a little while. So, once you get down to, I'd rather see 4 inches, 5 inches, and they've got it grazed down, move them on to somewhere else, and with some rain in 2-3 weeks, you can put them back on there for a few days if you wanted to.
For the first year, until we decided where we wanted permanent fence to be, we used polywire and just one strand. Most of these fields are away from the road, and we didn't have problems with cows getting out, but one strand polywire as our divider fences and our exterior fences did great for us.
So we don't really use temporary fencing much anymore because we've gone in and put in permanent fencing where the temporary fence was because we liked it so much. And we just got tired of the deer taking it down and calves taking it down and keeping up with it and replacing it and things like that. So we moved on, added gates where we wanted them, added permanent fencing. We will use temporary fencing in certain situations. We still have a paddock that we use temporary fencing on to rotate them through, and some new land that we're working on, we'll probably use temporary fencing up there once we get going a little bit more with that, and then we'll put in permanent fencing once we can afford to do that.
I've not got a good holding facility put in place just yet. So where I had these panels set up and a sweep gate, I had to get them funneled into there. So I've taken some poly wire, tied it off to the panels, and literally made me a funnel with just step-in post and a strand of poly wire on each side. But you know, after cattle have been conditioned a little bit to poly wire, they learn to respect it. Even if there's no power on there, you know, once you start using poly wire, you'll find multiple uses for it. There's no doubt about that.
We buried water line out to the middle of the field, and that way we could take that row crop land and make it kind of in a pie shape. We could divide it into pie shaped pieces that all feed back to that water. Mm-hmm. So with one water in a 100-acre field, we could have 5 or 6 different paddocks grazing 80, 90 animals, no problem, all the way into May and June.
We use fresh water. We're either around our animal facilities where we tap into those deep wells, and then I have one farm that we moved to. We actually are on county water, and we found out, we just kind of figured out we could buy the county water cheaper than we could go put a well in, and not knowing how long you're going to stay in that pasture, because if you decide to get rid of the cows, you don't have a well there that's, you know, it's not going to be used anymore.
So we added automatic drinkers last year. It's been one of the best additions to our farm. We still do have to use water tanks in certain locations off of wells, but we are able to graze certain paddocks better. We don't have to do water tanks nearly as much, and especially in the winter time, we don't have to worry about the water freezing over, or, you know, making sure that they have water in the winter.
We've got a dirt road right here. And on the other side of the road where we move cattle to, we've got 7 acres that has a water source there. About 3 years ago, I bought 15 acres that adjoins that. No water source. So we have got a perimeter style fence around there. We have now went in and put a cross fence with, you know, rotational grazing, poly wire, step-in post. But to keep them cows from coming back across the 7 acres, we had to get water up there. And you know, they're only over there for a few weeks and then they're back over here. So that's kind of where I come up with looking for a bulk type tank that I could feed a 300-gallon stock tank to get water over for the cattle. So once I got it in here hooked up, I was like, you know, I need to put something around this tank to kind of fence it out essentially. So I drove me 2 self-insulating fiberglass posts out here on the ends, run some poly wire around it. It's hooked back in over here to my 4-strand high tensile electric fence. And so when I come over here to hook it up, usually I'll cut the fence off, or I've taken a step-in post before and use it and push the wire down with. So back it in here, put it back up, and that way I can keep the cattle from stepping on the supply line.
Here we combat our water challenges by just running pipe on top of the ground. We just use a black poly pipe that you could pick up at a hardware store. Take it, the fittings are fairly inexpensive. We take that. It seems to, even once it gets a little bit below freezing, it seems to retain a lot of heat in the wintertime. That we can help with that. But a lot of times if we need to, we'll haul water in the winter. As far as moving it around, that's one of the most beneficial things that I see, is in our system having the ability to move water. If we have an area that's really has a lot of weeds that are very prominent to one specific area, and you put the water there, a lot of times what we've seen from our experience is put the water there, you're going to have a lot of traffic, and almost the time that you're going to move them, you can broadcast a desirable plant species seed right into that, and you're replacing weeds with something that you actually want. So next time that you come through and graze where you may have had whatever there, now you've got brassicas or clovers or something else.
We can put up 200 or 300 acres worth of pasture in poly wire in a day, and that's a one-time thing. And rotating cows on grass doesn't take very long every day. Feed hay, and to have to pay somebody to feed hay or do it yourself would be a huge hassle on me personally, The only time we've had to use hay in the past is in the deep, deep cold of December and January when it rises in its dormant stage. And that's in eastern North Carolina. That's maybe a month period at the most, and we're not really having to feed very much hay at all.
Really doesn't take that much time. And if you're stockpiling fescue and you're grazing that, or stockpiling any kind of forage as far as that goes for winter feeding, if you compare that for how much time it took you to put your coveralls on, go crank the tractor, go get a bale of hay, drive out in the field, cut the string off, dump the bale of hay, and then come back, you have to count all that time where you could have just walked out there and dropped that one strand of poly wire and came back to the house. The daily moves with polywire from one paddock to the next has definitely calmed the cattle down, I think. I mean, it's not like they were crazy to begin with, but it gets you, very close to them. You can look at their eyes, you can look at their feet, you can look at their body condition. It certainly makes everybody easy to handle. And we've had a sick cow that we've just gotten behind them with one strand of wire and just moved them across the pasture. That they weren't in a paddock. We just, between Kim and I, just took that wire and moved them.
Rotational grazing on our farm has really helped us, connect with our cattle and see them on a regular basis. They're really laid back. They're easygoing. We can pretty much go to a gate and they're ready to move. So we're able to check them. We check their eyes. We're checking their feet. We're checking if one's ready to calve. We can easily walk through the herd with no problems because they're used to us being out on foot as we're moving them around the farm.
The biggest obstacle for us was probably the cost, just the upfront cost of the polywire and the materials, because we didn't have any of that. But once we got it and started to use it, in our summer pastures, we had been using temporary wires already. So the cows were used to them, and putting them up's a breeze. Just dealing with the polywire is very easy to handle, especially when you're doing something for the first time and you could put up a fence and decide you don't like it like that and change it. It was very adaptable and very easy for us to use and figure out what we want to do long term.
Doing it. The hardest thing was you go there and look and it's like, what are we going to do today? And then how am I going to lay this out? But if you'll just take that one day and go start laying it out, put your post in and start figuring it out. And then the next time you do it, you'll say, I can make this a little better and a little better. And then now we've got one farm set up. I don't think you can make it any better because it's too easy now. And we're running 50 head of cows on that farm. And every 2 days they go to a different paddock in there. I want to see how that works this winter with the rye. I go back to that again.
It's trial and error.
Yeah.
There's no recipe for it, because what works on our place may not work on somebody else's place. And that's the beauty, or one of the beautiful things about polywire and temporary fencing. It's temporary. If it doesn't work, then you move it to a different location when you're ready to graze that area again. Until you put your hands on it. And then once you've done it, any part of it 2 or 3 times, you learn tricks of the trade, and you're like, okay, it'll work this way, and it'll work this way better than it'll work another way. But again, trial and error.
But find something that'll work for you right here. Like I said earlier, doing something is better than doing nothing, and we're all going to face obstacles. But how do we overcome those obstacles? Are we going to let them sit here and push us down, or are we going to stand up and say, well, you know what, I'm going to find a way to get this done. So like I say, at the end of the day, just find what works for you. That can be a multiple different uses or options or whatnot, but find what works for you. We've had to do things with shade in here and moving some polywire again, temporary fencing, to where I could implement shade up here. So where there's a will, there's a way.